Hello. Today I'm gonna show you how to make master scale track of sorts or one scale source for your whole project in Bitwig, or more specifically how to use one scale or switch the scale on the fly so that it changes across the whole project. Usually what you do is you add something like diatonic transposer, which changes the input notes to a specific diatonic scale that you can choose here. But what if you want to change the scale for each and every track that you have in the project? So that's what I'm going to explain here. The secret sauce for this trick is a device called Note Harmonizer. And the proper use of this device is actually using the source, live harmony source, as it says here, that have all the notes in your scale active all the time. For that, I'm using this short clip on a loop, which uses all the notes from C3 to B3, so basically whole octave and all the notes in it. Then what I'm doing in the device chain, I'm using note latch in case I want to disable this clip, or in some cases clip is not running. I can sustain all the notes. That's basically I'm launching from the clip. Maybe I'm planning to arrange my scale changes, and for that probably better use note latch. Or if I want to input scales by hand, just by pressing all the notes in the octave on the keyboard, that's also an option. But either way, even without the note latch device, what I'm doing here is changing the scale after receiving all the notes from the octave. And here I set my scale selector preset, which is a collection of different scales utilizing the NoteFX selector, and each layer have different basically preset of transposition map. And there is a key remote control that allows to change the key of the scale, but unfortunately it doesn't actually work like it's supposed to. It doesn't really shift stuff around as you would expect to. And to fix that, you can just add note pitch shifter and just add semitones. So then +2 would be D minor in this case. Let's hear how it affects the sound. Right now my track is playing in minor, just C minor. And so this device right here, Hyperion, is my generator plugin. So it generates the notes for me. And after that plugin I insert the note harmonizer. And you always leave this incoming note key as C, because if you change this, you're basically shifting up or down the whole scale relatively. And unless you want some of the tracks relatively offset in terms of scale to the others, you can do this, but typically you want to leave it at C. So basically, even if I enable this pitch shifter and change my scale to D minor, this stays at C. And by the way, you probably already hear how the whole track changes when I just shift the scale a few semitones. Let's choose another scale. The transitions can be pretty smooth, So you can determine the transition rate with the length of this loop. Currently it's like 8 notes, I guess. You can shorten the loop if you want to, so the moment when you change the settings here in the next round, when the notes are triggered again, that's when the reference will change in all the instances of Note Harmonizer. So yeah, that's the basic thing you need to do. Create a clip with all the notes in your octave, then use either diatonic transposer or anything. Maybe you have some VST plugin that processes MIDI and outputs specific scale, and then use note harmonizers on each track before the instrument, so your notes are conformed to the scale. And I'm using the output of the scalar track right here. So I can link the already pre-made scalar track clip. You just drop it in your clip launcher, and it's already got the scale selector, got the clip. So all you need to do is add Note Harmonizer and start creating your tracks all in the same scale. I also created a template, but unfortunately bitwiggers.com doesn't currently have the template of sorts, so here I've chosen the scale track template as my default template, and it looks like this. So I don't need any sound coming out from this track, so it's set to -infinity, and my default instrument track is just already routed Note Harmonizer. I can just duplicate it and then add instruments as I need it. Instead of adding new tracks, I just leave one empty with Note Harmonizer, and any duplicate that I create, I just add instruments to it. So let's try it. Like, again, add some generator, then let's add some instrument. Can use some preset, maybe in specifics categories. And by default, what do you have? Bypass. So when we bypassing device chain on the scale track, we are using just note clip information. So if we input all notes from the scale, we basically not restricting our instruments in any way. So what goes in goes out unaffected. And if we do something like this with the keys filtered out already, then we are applying that specific scale. So let's set this Hyperion to chromatic. So basically it outputs all the possible keys. And if I changed my clip, then it changes the scale. It doesn't matter which scale I have in this plugin. It will constrain the notes to whatever scale I have in the clip, or if I change the scale afterwards in the device chain. So you can probably imagine that you could also lay down all these scale changes in the arranger, like so. Let's enable looping and range in this specific track. So right here happens the transition. It's not only useful for live performances, like generative type of music creation, like I do usually, but also could be useful instrument when you're arranging. Sort of, I guess, like chord tracks, like some DAWs have, but instead it's a more like scale track. So if you would use diatonic transposer instead and switch back to the clip launcher for this, you can also automate which specific scale you're going to use. So the scale mode, this is the one. Here is a major scale, and then you can just switch gear midway to another scale. But yeah, you can't exactly combine automation with this clip launcher, unfortunately. While doing this video, I've actually realized a few things that I needed to add to my clip preset, the scale track. And the thing is, when you want to automate something like diatonic transposer, so let's say you want to change the scale or the key and the automation of the diatonic transposer instead of using clips. In this case, if you want to use automation on arranger, you would have to generate notes not from the clip launcher, but all in its own. So for that, I've created this note fix layer that basically creates notes whenever I hit the play, like this. So by default it's using 16 notes. I should probably add this to the remote control so you can make it faster if you want to. But the point is that it generates all 12 notes as this chromatic clip does all the time. So your diatonic transposers always have notes to work with. And I also added this chain, just empty chain device with the pitch 12 modulator to simply monitor the output of this device. Now if I enable my generator, you can hear that the scale is actually changed according to the automation. There's also option for free running the note generation all the time. It's useful if you want to play something without transport playing and still be on scale. So the notes still generate, scale is still generated all the time this way. you can change the placement on the timeline if you want to quickly change your scale. That's one way to do it. Anytime you focus on the scale track, your arm will focus on scale track as well. So you might need to select your instrument so you can still play it while changing the scale. But yeah, when you hit somewhere on the timeline, all the automation applies to the device. But then you have to watch out for another interesting thing. So if I hold the chord right here and then change the scale, you notice that nothing changes. And that's because our arpeggiator is doing its work after the applied scale. If instead I place arpeggiator before the note harmonizer, then when I change the marker, you can hear the scale changes as well. And that's because if I sustain the note coming into note harmonizer, when the source changes its scale, so have a different notes coming into the source, it will not force the change on the notes that are already sustained. So you will have to keep that in mind. So if you have a clip in your arrangement with the long sustain, like it's a pad or something, it will not change the scale unless you also retrigger all the notes. So yeah, keep that in mind when arranging the scale changes. Sometimes it could be useful, like if you are making a change that's compatible between the different scales. Therefore, having the long sustained chords transition into new chords with new scale could be possible. Just like this. One other thing this can't do, the note harmonizer doesn't support the micro pitch or microtonal scales. So if you were to use the micro pitch device right here, these will not apply the scale change. So let's say use something like this. It still considers that we use all notes. And so you don't hear any change though. Hopefully Bitwig could add support for micro pitch or all the pitch expressions. That will be a big plus for microtonal music, because it's kind of pain in the ass to sync microtonal scales across the project at the moment. There is software for this, some VSTs, but since they added the micro pitch device itself, there should be a way to do it all across the project. As of now, it just seems like something to add the spice on top of regular music. But there's also one more thing that I wanted to show you. If you're using grid, for instance, and you want to use some complex patch, let's see what I've got here. So this patch right here, it uses the pitch quantize module. It have its own setting. What if you wanted also use the same settings that your note harmonizer uses? You can do that actually. You press this button, use note input, and also reference the scale track. Now it does the exact same thing that Node Harmonizer does. So whatever you play on this synth will have the same scale that your scale track has. As you can see, the first two notes are C and D. So yeah, generally you can pretty much set up your whole project in the same scale, no problem whatsoever. If you still got some questions, feel free to ask around. Maybe I should make part 2 or something, but as far as I can see, I've pretty much covered the whole topic.